Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? This is the best time to give a speech. It's also the best time to take a nap right after lunch. How many of you own Bitcoin? Wow, quite a few. Excellent. So I'm the speaker here. I'm also an author of a book, Wall Street Journal bestseller called The Promise of Bitcoin. I'm giving out free copies and signing it for you at the booth at Ballet outside in the other part where you had lunch over there. Okay, let's get started. So I see a lot of hands raised for those of you who have Bitcoin. Here I'm going to talk about Bitcoin's monetary transition from merely an electronic sort of internet money, magic internet money, to what I think will become a true global reserve asset class, as real money as anything. And it's going to take several years, maybe even a decade or two, but we're well on its way. So what is money? First of all, money means different things to different people. Obviously, the paper money you have in your pockets, or even the coins you may have in a piggy bank jar. But more importantly, money is actually defined both as a medium of exchange and a store of value. So it does two things. The first thing it does is it's used by people to pay for things. So instead of bartering, trading items for item, you can pay for things with money and sell goods and services for money, and money is an intermedium for changing between goods and services. That's what they mean by medium of exchange, exchanging goods and services. The second thing is it's a store of value. The idea is that money holds value. When we work, we earn money, and the money is supposed to represent the value we put in to make society happen, and that money should have the value for you whether you use it the same day, use it this month to pay rent, or use it next year to buy a car, or use it in 5 years for a nice vacation. So it should hold the value for you. That's what they mean by store of value. So Bitcoin is money. It's obvious to me, as someone who's been in Bitcoin for 11 years, that Bitcoin is money, but it is not obvious to the general public. So I'm here to tell you more about how it's going to transition to real money for people. Bitcoin started as peer-to-peer electronic cash. This is the Bitcoin white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote in 2008. It was published on October 31st, Halloween of 2008. And it's about Bitcoin as an electronic payment where people can send Bitcoin to each other without a third party serving as intermediary. That's how I started, electronic cash. It's also decentralized, let's see if it says that, yes, free open source software. So it's fully decentralized, meaning unlike traditional financial systems where money is controlled by banks and financial institutions, where there are large companies run by CEOs, where they control the flow, and even you have the Federal Reserve, all these government institutions, so everything's centralized. So Bitcoin was the real first biggest innovation in providing decentralized finance. And it's implemented using open source software that everyone with knowledge of computer science and programming can go in and look at the software code and verify that it is correct and it does what it says it'll do. For example, the 21 million Bitcoins of total issuance, you can verify that yourself if you have the sufficient knowledge. Oh, did we hit 21 million Bitcoins? No, not yet. They're alerting. The Federal Reserve is worried that I'm talking about Bitcoin too much. Okay, we have some emergency alert. Well, it's not related to Bitcoin, so I don't care. All right, so it's decentralized. This is the strongest aspect of Bitcoin and why it will be successful. The third point is it's actually a digital medium of exchange. So prior to Bitcoin, money was served as medium of exchange, and you would transfer US dollars either in person or do electronic transfers, but it's always through a third party. With Bitcoin, now you can do a digital exchange, sending payments without a third party. For those of you who may have grown up abroad or who have lived in a foreign country, some of you may know the difficulties of sending money back and forth, either abroad, internationally, or even within countries. It's a very difficult task that many Americans here are not aware of. So even though we live in a very advanced nation, the rest of the world has not really caught up in terms of the monetary system, in terms of the financial system. So this digital medium exchange is very useful globally. On the fourth, Bitcoin is actually the most valuable digital asset. So Bitcoin at one point crossed over $1 trillion in total value. So today it's not quite there yet, but it's almost there. It's several $100 billion. So it's actually the most, still, even though it's under a trillion, it's still the most valuable digital asset. And as you know, there's an explosion of all the other cryptocurrencies, many other alternate coins. You've heard of the terms like DeFi. You've heard about the revolution of NFTs as investments. So there's all these things going on in the, whether you want to talk about the metaverse, DeFi, GameFi, decentralized, what they call decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. All that ecosystem, the Web3 stuff, all of that is the new internet, if you will. And all of that, the roots are in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is fundamentally the currency of choice used by that whole class. And maybe you yourselves are not, wearing VR headset goggles, going to metaverse and doing all this DeFi stuff on a daily basis. But be assured, our kids and grandkids will be digital natives, crypto natives, and this is the future. And lastly, Bitcoin itself is a global store of value. Okay, it's become the true global store of value. Many companies in the last year or so have started embracing Bitcoin and putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. That is a big deal. Traditionally, when profitable companies make money, whether one of my favorite investments is Apple computers. Apple, when they make money from selling iPhones, they leave it in their bank account. They have billions and billions in the bank accounts. That's on their balance sheet under the assets section. But companies like Tesla, and also you may have heard of MicroStrategy, they decided not just to hold US dollars, but to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And that is a big deal because they're trusting that Bitcoin will hold its value more. And the reason is we now know inflation is real. With all of the money printing, with all of the so-called loose monetary policy, there's been excessive money printing. The stats are something like over half or 3/4 of the US dollar in circulation was printed in the last 3 years during this pandemic era. So with all this money floating around, that's why real estate prices are going up. That's why food prices are going up. McDonald's meal, quarter pounder cheese meal now costs some $12 in Las Vegas. That's unheard of before, right? But soon you'll be having steaks over $100 at a restaurant. You'll be having Happy Meals over $25, right? This will happen in the coming years as inflation continues, and that's why they're raising interest rates. So it's kind of like bad news on both sides, right? So Bitcoin is the way to sort of preserve your value if you want to have long-term exposure to the interest rates problem. Okay, Bitcoin as legal tender. Let's talk about this. What is legal tender? Legal tender is just a fancy name for what is considered legal money in a specific country. You may have heard the term fiat money, US dollars, euros, Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, Japanese yen, and so on. So legal tender, it just means that the money is considered official and businesses are required to accept that legal tender for goods and services in that country. So obviously here in America, the US dollar is legal tender. The Canadian dollar is not legal tender in the US. You're allowed to own Canadian dollars, you're allowed to own euros, but businesses in the United States are not compelled to accept Canadian dollars or euros, even if you have them. So you'd have to exchange them at a foreign exchange desk at the airport or some tourist place. Now, so what about legal tender? Well, the important thing is governments mandate legal tenders has to be accepted by businesses. Turns out not every country issues their own money. Many countries have gone through hyperinflation through their currencies, whether it's Zimbabwe or El Salvador. Argentina is going through that, So many countries have gone through hyperinflation and they end up not using the local currency and people end up using the US dollar as a default currency. So for example, El Salvador, why did the N go down? If you notice the typo there. So in El Salvador, it's supposed to say Bitcoin in El Salvador. So what happens is recently, the government, the president, was a big fan of Bitcoin, and he announced, and by the way, El Salvador had issues with its own currency, so for the longest time, the US dollar was a de facto legal tender in El Salvador. Okay, so being hotels, businesses, McDonald's, Starbucks, they would accept the US dollar. You could make charges to your credit card in US dollar. However, for Bitcoin, the president recently announced that Bitcoin was to be made made legal tender in El Salvador. What that means is businesses and all that in El Salvador has to accept Bitcoin. So this is a new thing, and they gave out a special wallet and gave out free Bitcoins to all the citizens and so on to get the integration started, get the thing going, okay? And of course, we have Bitcoin legal tender in many parts of the world as well. So in Lugano, Switzerland, a small town in Switzerland, they also have Bitcoin as legal tender. So they're compelled to accept Bitcoin. People pay for goods and services in Bitcoin. In the United States, this is a hot topic. Congress is very much aware of the movement to try to make Bitcoin legal tender in the U.S. It's off to a slow start, but given our democratic principles, I think if enough people want it, it will become legislation, it will get passed. It's a matter of time, in my opinion. Canada, we had a recent episode where the truckers in northern Canada, they had financial blockade, they had their assets frozen, by the government, so they turned to Bitcoin as a way to fund their operations. And of course, in Nigeria, even though Bitcoin is not legal tender in Nigeria, a country in West Africa, Bitcoin is de facto and used very much so by the people of Nigeria for remittances, for international transfers. So this is an example of a country where Bitcoin is not legal tender yet, but it is very commonly used in society already. So this is bodes well for the future of Bitcoin. So let's talk about the next topic, the very sensitive topic, the end of the U.S. petrodollar. So as an American, obviously, I think, America is great. I think the policies. But one of the things is this petrodollar policy has been around for several decades. And it's problematic. There are many people predicting the downfall of the U.S. petrodollar. Well, what is a petrodollar? The petrodollar is a standard where oil is paid for by U.S. dollars, in U.S. dollars. And supposedly there's a secret agreement between the U.S. government and Saudi Arabia and the countries producing oil and OPEC that says they can only sell oil in U.S. dollar, which creates global demand for U.S. dollars for countries that want to buy oil, right? So this is the so-called petrodollar standard. And over time, we're seeing this standard getting unraveled, right? Recently, Russia, the Ukraine war and all that, all the sanctions, they've announced they will only sell Russian oil and natural gas by taking Russian rubles. They wouldn't even take euros. So this is countries trying to take their stab at it, trying to break up the U.S. petrodollar standard. Now, whether or not this happens, we will see, okay? So let's look at some new monetary potential on the horizon. We have CDBCs. So how many of you have heard of the term CDBC? It's a long acronym. So CDBC, for those of you who don't know, stands for Central Bank Issued Digital Currency. Central Bank Digital Currency. So it would be the same units as the local traditional central bank currency, but it's a digital version that's cleared through the blockchain. They use a centralized blockchain to do the transaction clearing. So one of the first countries to do that is actually China. China is already in the last stages of the launch for the central bank digital currency, the digital eRMB, the renminbi, okay? Europe, there's a motion in Europe to launch a digital version of the euro, and I think in America they're going to look to do that too. If you remember a few years ago, Facebook tried to launch a currency called Libra. How many of you remember or heard of that, the digital currency by Facebook? So that effort got shot down. It got shot down by Congress. It got shot down by the regulators. They had a very tough time. Eventually, the Libra team had to rename itself to something different to sort of get away from that old name with a lot of stigma. They called themselves Diem, D-I-E-M. And even then, it couldn't move forward. So I think the whole project, I believe, the latest is that it's been pretty much abandoned. So the whole Libra to Diem thing I think it's dead in its tracks. And the reason is governments don't want to let private companies issue money. I think that's the issue. Okay, so stable coins are another version of digital currency, but it's issued by non-government entities. You've heard of USDT, USDC. These are different versions of crypto that are pegged one-to-one to the US dollar. Okay, we have the gold standard, which is very traditional gold standard. Okay, before the printing of money, the gold standard was used worldwide for over 1,000 years. thousands of years. You also have the concept of commodity-backed money, where instead of backing the money by gold, which is a commodity, by the way, you could back it by oil reserves, back it by other types of metals, precious metals, rare earth, and other energy products like natural gas and so on and so forth. And finally, we can talk about Bitcoin. I personally think the brightest future is Bitcoin as a global reserve asset class. Okay, I've been in Bitcoin for many years, and through my long research, I truly believe that Bitcoin has a potential to be the global reserve asset class. Today's money is actually based sort of pegged to the US dollar, everything, and then you have the so-called SDR, the special drawing rights under the IMF, okay? So that system, I think, is going to transition in the next few decades to something different. And I personally predict Bitcoin will be a core principle of that, okay? So this is essentially the flow of the history of money to become for Bitcoin. Quickly tell you guys, for those of you who hold Bitcoin, own cryptocurrency, we have this amazing, I'm the founder and CEO of this company called Ballet. We have this amazing cold storage wallet, 24K gold plated. We sell this at our booth. Come learn more about it to keep your Bitcoin and cryptocurrency safe so that you don't get hacked electronically. And we have an app that goes with it. We want to emphasize the importance of self-custody, the strength of physical security. It's very simple to use. There's no setup whatsoever, zero setup. And you have the security and privacy of your funds, okay? So, and also you get real-time asset value tracking with the app. So come check out the booth, and I want to leave a few minutes to answer some questions about Bitcoin, the future of money, and also to reward you guys. The first 5 people who have great questions will get a free copy of my book. I'll sign it for you right after in this hall. Yeah, so come on up. If you want to step up, I see a gentleman there raising your hand. Come on up. You get a chance to win a free copy of an autographed copy of this book. What's your name, sir?
Wesley James.
Yeah, there's a microphone. You just walk past it. You're too tall.
I was getting the book.
Yes. Well, my staff here, Thomas, will give you the book after you ask a question. Only if it's good, though.
What has caused Bitcoin to drop 10% today and 20% this week?
They were worried I was going to give a bad speech, so everybody sold Bitcoin. But now that I gave a good speech, I think Bitcoin's going to rally. No, that's a fake answer. The real answer is a lot of market movements. I think the global stock market has come corrected a little bit in the last few days. So all the liquidity stuff. Bitcoin, by the way, is very, very volatile. So for it to drop 10% in a day, to me, is par for the course. It's actually quite normal for Bitcoin to go up 5 or 10% in a single day. I would only get a little bit surprised if Bitcoin fell 40% in a single day. So this is really par for the course. So my personal take is Bitcoin is a good, so even though I'm not a registered investment advisor, but just amongst friends and family, well, people know I invest in Bitcoin a lot, and I think it's a future of money, so I think it's an investment of our lifetime, right? So if you obviously do your own research, if you're interested in investing in Bitcoin, you have to be aware of the volatility. In fact, I dedicated a whole chapter about volatility in my book. So come get a free copy. It's rare to get a free copy, signed copy by the author. Come to our booth, get it. And then there's a lot of good reading on here. It's all about Bitcoin and the currency. Thank you for the great question. Okay, Thomas in the back will give you a copy of the book, and then after my speech, I'll sign it for you. Okay, next up, yeah, stand up, sir. Come to the front. Line up behind this gentleman if you want to ask questions. We have one more here. Just line up, and then yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I already have the book, but my question is, when we look at Bitcoin basically as a sort of a bearer of value, one of the underlying themes is it was also called basically the digital gold, right?
Digital gold.
Digital gold, right? The challenge is, the question is related to the volatility. Basically, when you look at data over the last 1 year, the correlation of Bitcoin with basically stock market movement is become very strong, right? It's almost a correlation of 0.45, 0.5. So can it truly be called basically sort of digital gold, given basically it's so highly correlated with basically equity investments?
Well, that's a good topic. So Bitcoin being called digital gold has no relation to whether it has correlation with the stock market movement. Okay, gold is gold, stock market is stock market. Sometimes gold and stock markets trade in a correlated fashion. Sometimes it trades in a non-correlated fashion, right? Whether or not trades with the stock market is not about whether or not it is gold or not gold. The reason Bitcoin is considered digital gold is because gold is a natural commodity where the value is not backed by any entity or government. Think about it. What is the price of gold backed by? It's backed by its fundamental features and functionality. So for those of you who are good chemistry students in high school, you remember that gold, given its atomic geometry and so on, is an inert metal that's not reactive, that is super dense and has a very shiny, yellow shiny color that is very unique and cannot be replicated by anything else. So as one interesting fact, for example, heavy, dense things cannot be replicated by anything else. However, something that's light can be imitated using heavy elements if you space it out. Does that make sense? Something that is less dense and less light, that's more light, lightweight as opposed to something very heavy, can be imitated by something heavier by putting more air in it. But something that's very heavy cannot be faked. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's why gold cannot be imitated. And by it not being able to be imitated and counterfeited is what makes gold very suitable as global money. So people know the history. All over the world, many civilizations all came to the same conclusion to use gold as money. Gold and silver, both very dense metal. Right? The reason gold is better than silver is because silver tarnishes, but gold doesn't. In any case, the reason Bitcoin is digital gold is because Bitcoin has very fundamental properties that make it very good money. And that's the reason. Okay, nothing to do with the stock market prices and all that. Bitcoin is still very volatile. Okay, thank you for that great question. Thomas, would you give this gentleman a book, please? Okay, next up.
My question is, I'm Doug Gaines from Chicago.
Yes.
My question pertains to security. How do we make people, our clients, feel comfortable in the security that's wrapped around the volatility that you mentioned a little bit earlier?
You're talking about the security for it not to be stolen or lost, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for Bitcoin, for Bitcoin, right? For Bitcoin
Yes.
and cryptocurrency, that's a great question. Two things. Number one is security is very important. Okay, traditional monetary systems, traditional financial systems, traditional assets are all titled assets, and titled assets are sometimes held by a custodian. Okay, so for example, the money in your bank, it's held under your name. For example, the stocks in your brokerage account held under your name. Those are custodied assets, and they hold it for you. So even if you lose a password, lose the account number, they can retrieve it for you by your identity. But gold is a bearer asset. Gold, diamonds, paintings are bearer assets. Don't lose it. You have to have physical custody yourself. Bitcoin is like that. So it's very important you find a good custody solution, whether you self-custody or you find a reliable company to custody the Bitcoin for you. So always do a lot of research, find that out. In fact, that's why I started Ballet. The company I founded, we make physical wallets for self-custody. This is the gold-plated wallet you saw on the screen earlier. And the idea is for you to put your Bitcoin in here. It's inert, no electronics. You can hold it yourself, put it in a safe, lock it up, dig a hole in your backyard, bury it there, and you will not lose it. You cannot get electronically hacked. Your Bitcoin, you cannot lose your Bitcoin through hacking if you put your stuff in here. So that's the answer. You need to make sure you have good custody of your Bitcoin digital currency. Okay, time for one more question and we're done.
Thanks,
Will
Bobby.
you stand up, sir?
Yes, thanks, Bobby, for the
Yes.
book. You talk about Bitcoin being legal tender in many different ways. Now, do you see any possibilities moving forward that a Federal Reserve or a Congress, the lawmakers, would want to make this a centralized system, given that it would generate a lot of profit? And you know where the governments, wherever there's money, they want to be part of it because it generates taxes, it generates revenue for them. So do you see this becoming a centralized identity?
So the answer is study Bitcoin more through the book, and you'll see that Bitcoin can never be centralized itself because Bitcoin is like air and water. It's already out there. So no country, government, or company can put out their hand and pull and suck away all the Bitcoin. It just doesn't, it's not possible, right? So just like gold, right? Even if governments governments cannot control gold because you may have gold with you, whatever, hide it, and governments cannot suck it all into their hands. But governments can control digital money, right? They can actually control your money by sucking it all up or issuing more and devaluing it or control the interest rates and so on. They cannot do that with gold. They cannot do that with Bitcoin. So this is one of the really strong points about why Bitcoin is so valuable, is the way that it's decentralized. Okay? So I hope you get to read about this in the book. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you, and have a good day, gentlemen and ladies.